They came onto my land like they owned it. 3 SUVs, clean and smug-looking, rolled up my gravel drive like they were heading to brunch. The sun hadn't even burned through the morning mist when they stepped out, clipboard warriors dressed in khakis and confidence. One of them, a woman in oversized sunglasses and a tight ponytail, didn't even bother to say hello. She just pointed at the property marker I'd pounded into the red dirt years ago and said, "This belongs to the community now." I stared at her, sweat sticking my shirt to my back, hands still greasy from fixing the tractor. "Excuse me?" I said, but she didn't flinch. "According to the updated HOA charter," she said with a practiced smile, "this land is now designated for shared community use. Trails, picnic areas, open recreation. You can keep your house, but the acreage? That's for everyone." I laughed. Not a chuckle. A full, cracked laugh that made the birds go quiet. That land was my family's legacy. 40 acres passed down from my grandfather, who built the first fence post with his bare hands and a borrowed shovel. And now they wanted to turn it into a dog park. I should have lost it right then. Screamed. Threatened. Maybe even thrown a punch. But I didn't. I just stared as they walked my fence line like it was already theirs, taking photos, pointing, whispering. That was the day they tried to steal my life. And it was the day I decided they would regret ever setting foot on my ranch. It all started 6 months earlier, before the dust and the lawsuits and the electric fences. Back when I was just a quiet guy trying to keep my granddad's ranch alive in a neighborhood that hated everything I stood for. I moved into that ranch house after my dad died. It was the last thing he left me, an old, 2-story farmhouse with chipping paint and enough creaks to drive you crazy at night. It sat just beyond the new subdivision, separated by a thin strip of woods and a whole lot of resentment. The subdivision was called Sagebrush Hollow, but there wasn't a sagebrush in sight. Just rows of cookie-cutter houses and bored couples who spent more time gossiping than living. I didn't fit in. I didn't try to. And they didn't like that. I kept a few goats, fixed old machines, and minded my own business. I didn't attend block parties. Didn't mow my fields into golf course stripes. And I sure as hell didn't ask for permission before planting tomatoes. The trouble really began when Tyler Carlson got elected HOA president. Tyler was the kind of guy who wore boat shoes in the middle of the desert and called himself an entrepreneur even though nobody knew what he did. His wife, Madison, ran the neighborhood Facebook group like it was a government agency. And the two of them treated Sagebrush Hollow like their personal kingdom. One morning, I found a note duct taped to my mailbox. "Dear neighbor, your barn does not meet community aesthetic standards. Please paint it beige or face fines." HOA. That was their first mistake. I painted it black instead. The notices kept coming. Noise violations for my rooster. Improper storage for my tractor. Even a threat about unregistered livestock, which I'm pretty sure they made up. I tried reasoning. Even showed them the deed, how the ranch wasn't technically part of the HOA. But that only made Tyler madder. "We're expanding the jurisdiction," he told me one day while sipping from a monogram thermos. "We voted. You don't get to vote on someone else's land," I said. But he just smirked, like he knew something I didn't. Turns out, they'd been planning it for months. Digging into old paperwork. Lobbying the county. Twisting a technicality from decades ago into something that could ruin me. And then, just like that, they showed up with their SUVs and their clipboards, declaring it community land. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the dirt. My dirt. And I realized something painful. This wasn't just about grass and goats and fences. It was about control. They hated that I was different. That I didn't need their rules or their approval. that I had something real, roots, history, land, and they would keep coming until they took all of it, unless I fought back. I didn't have money for lawyers, but I had something better, grit, and a whole lot of stubborn spite. So I went to the hardware store, maxed out a credit card, and bought enough wire to wrap the entire ranch twice over. If they wanted to play dirty, they had no idea what I was capable of. The first spark flew just after midnight. Not from the fence. I hadn't wired it yet. No, this one came from inside me. From a fire lit deep in my chest, burning through every quiet bone in my body. I'd spent my whole life avoiding conflict, staying out of the mess. But they dragged me into the storm. Now, I was done being polite. The next morning, I rolled out of bed before the sun rose and got to work. My hands knew the rhythm: dig, set, stretch, clamp. I'd built fences with my dad when I was a kid. He used to say, "Fences keep the good in and the bad out." Remember that? Well, the bad had come knocking. And this time, I wasn't just building fences. I was building walls. Every post I drove into the ground felt like a punch. Every spool of wire, a warning. I looped electric cables through the mesh, rigging the whole perimeter with just enough voltage to say, "Back off." Not enough to hurt anyone, just enough to make sure they didn't come strolling in with picnic baskets and frisbees. By noon, my property looked like a military zone. Warning signs were zip-tied to every gate. Private property. Electrified fencing. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I even mounted an old security camera on the barn and wired it to a fake monitor I set up in the living room window. I wanted them to feel watched. And it worked. The first visit came from Madison. She marched up in her tennis skirt and pastel hoodie, holding her phone like a badge. "You can't do this," she snapped, eyeing the warning signs. "Doing it anyway," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "This land was reclassified. It's community use. You don't own it anymore." I walked up to the gate, flipped a switch, and let the wire pop faintly in response. "You sure about that?" She didn't touch the gate. Just turned and stormed off, tapping furiously on her phone. I knew she was calling Tyler. And probably the cops. Fine by me. Let them come. 3 days later, a county inspector showed up. Young guy named Marco with a clipboard and tired eyes. He was polite, nervous, even, and asked if I had documentation showing the ranch wasn't part of the HOA. I handed him a folder an inch thick. Original deed. Plat maps. Letters from my grandfather. Everything dated and signed. He flipped through it slowly, nodding as he read. "This all checks out," he said. "Honestly, I don't know how they got this past zoning. Looks like your land isn't subject to HOA jurisdiction at all." "No kidding," I said, deadpan. He chuckled, shook his head. "You'd be surprised how many of these HOAs try stuff like this. But I'll write it up. They can't touch your property." I watched him drive off and felt a weight lift. But it didn't last long. Because the next day, I woke up to tire tracks across my pasture. Someone had cut the fence, rolled through my back field with their truck, tore up the soil, ripped through the edge of my vegetable garden like it meant nothing, and spray painted a single word on the side of my barn in red. "Share!" That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't just legal now. It was personal. They weren't trying to win a battle. They were trying to break me. And I snapped. I called the sheriff and filed a report. Got pictures of the tracks, the paint, everything. But I knew how slow the law worked out here. Justice, if it came at all, would come too late. So I made my own plans. I doubled the fencing. Wired a second line higher, out of reach from the ground. Installed motion sensor lights that lit up the whole yard like a prison compound. I even rescued a half-blind Rottweiler named Tank from the shelter. Old, quiet, and loyal. The perfect ranch dog. He took to the porch like he'd been waiting his whole life to guard it. I didn't sleep much that week. I kept the lights on, shotgun leaning behind the door. Not because I wanted to use it, but because I needed them to know I was done playing nice. Word spread fast. Neighbors drove by slow, their necks craning to see the fortress I'd built. The HOA board started whispering about legal action, but no one set foot past my fence. Until one night, someone did. Tank started growling around 3 a.m. Low, quiet, steady. I peeked through the window and saw a shadow near the back gate. Someone in dark clothes, crouched low, cutting the wire again. I grabbed my flashlight, flipped the circuit breaker, and let the fence light up with a loud snap pop. The figure yelped and stumbled back, falling into the dirt. I stepped outside, shining the beam straight into his face. Tyler Carlson. His hands were scraped, his fancy sweater torn, and his smug face? Gone. You were trespassing, I said coldly. He stood up, brushing himself off like it was no big deal. You don't get it, man. We're building a community. You don't belong here. This ranch is a relic. I stepped closer. And you're a coward. He blinked, stunned. Excuse me? You didn't come here for the community. You came here to control it. But you picked the wrong man to push. He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, but I raised a hand and pointed toward the road. Leave. Now! Before I press charges. He hesitated, then turned and limped off into the dark. And as the gate shut behind him, I flipped the breaker again, lighting up the wire with one clean buzz. A line had been drawn, and war had officially begun. By morning, the video had gone viral. I didn't post it, but someone did. One of my trail cams caught the whole thing, Tyler sneaking around in the dark, snipping my fence like a raccoon with an agenda, only to get zapped and crawl away like a kid caught shoplifting. The video was grainy, black and white, but crystal clear where it counted. His face, his bolt cutters, the fall, and my voice, calm as steel. You came to control it, but you picked the wrong man to push. Someone on Facebook shared it with the caption, HOA president gets what he deserves. Within 48 hours, it had 200,000 views and counting. I didn't ask for the attention, but I wasn't about to hide from it either. If they wanted to paint me as the angry rancher out of step with their manicured world, fine. But now the world had seen what they were really doing, how they twisted a lie, trespassed, vandalized, and tried to gaslight a man off his own land. And Tyler? He went silent. But Madison didn't. The next HOA newsletter came printed in glossy full color. Community safety at risk. Unstable neighbor builds electric fence. There was a blurry photo of my warning sign. She claimed I had booby-trapped the neighborhood and threatened innocent residents with violence. She even accused me of harboring a vicious attack dog trained to maul children. Tank. Sweet old Tank, who wouldn't bite a biscuit in half unless you asked him nicely. I wanted to laugh, but the anger boiled deeper than that now. Because this wasn't just public shaming. This was strategy. They wanted to build fear. Make me the villain. Twist everything so that they were the victims. And I knew exactly where that would lead. Lawyers. Injunctions. Maybe even a forced eviction if they played the right hands in local government. And I couldn't let it get that far. So I fought back, with something Madison and Tyler weren't expecting. I went public. I called a local news station. Told them everything. Showed them the original property deed, the fencing permits, the vandalism report, the tire tracks, and the photo of Cher scrawled across my barn. The young reporter, Allison, ate it up. She did a 2-minute segment titled, "Rancher Under Siege, When the HOA Goes Too Far." And just like that, public opinion flipped. I got emails from folks all over the country, other homeowners who'd been bullied by HOAs, people who'd lost gardens, treehouses, even pets because of arbitrary rules. They called me brave. Some called me a hero. But I didn't feel like one. I still woke up every night to check the fence. Still kept Tank close. Still waited for the next shoe to drop. Because people like Madison didn't lose quietly. It came in the form of a cease and desist letter. A thick packet, hand-delivered by a man in a suit who didn't look me in the eye. The HOA had hired a firm out of Phoenix. Flashy, aggressive, expensive. They claimed I was operating an unlawful barrier within shared-use land, and that my fencing posed a threat to community safety. The final page was a threat of lawsuit. I read the whole thing on my porch while Tank snored by my feet. Then I lit a match and burned it in a coffee can. I didn't have money for a big fight in court. But I had something stronger, proof. I emailed every document to the local sheriff, the county assessor, and a handful of lawyers who'd reached out after seeing the news story. I wasn't going down without a fight, and I wasn't going down alone. Still, they kept pushing. The HOA began patrolling my fence line with golf carts, peering in with binoculars like they were birdwatchers spying on enemy territory. They stopped my mail once, cut the water line to one of my troughs, filed noise complaints about my rooster, again. And then, just when I thought they couldn't stoop lower, they came after my family. My younger sister, Amy, lived 2 towns over. Single mom. Teacher. Good heart, soft-spoken, the kind of person who brought cupcakes to neighbors she barely knew. One day, her landlord got a letter from the HOA. It wasn't about her rent. It wasn't even their jurisdiction. But the letter said she was housing a relative who was under active civil complaint, and that continued association with said individual may reflect negatively on your property and tenant profile. She called me in tears. "They're trying to ruin my life now," she whispered. That was it. That was the final straw. That night, I walked the property line with Tank. Cool wind. Crickets humming. A hard quiet under the stars. And I made a choice. No more warnings. No more waiting. They wanted to bring war to my doorstep. Fine. But when I fought back this time, I wasn't playing defense. I started with the signs. Big ones. Bold black letters on blinding white boards. I posted them on every side of the ranch where the HOA loved to snoop. Private property. Not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But I added something new too. At the bottom of every sign in bright red. Smiling? You're on camera. Because while Madison and Tyler had been playing politics, I'd been upgrading my surveillance. Not just trail cams anymore, real cameras. Motion activated. Cloud backed. Night vision. The works. I'd been gathering evidence. Dates. Faces. License plates. Every HOA board member who had stepped onto my land since that first clipboard ambush. And now, it was time to use it. I walked into the county courthouse with a folder under my arm and a fire in my gut. I wasn't a lawyer, but I didn't have to be. Not when I had facts. I filed for a harassment restraining order against Tyler Carlson, Madison Carlson, and the entire SHHOA board, citing video evidence of trespassing, property damage, intimidation, and targeted harassment of me and my family. The clerk raised her eyebrows when she saw the footage. "You might actually win," she whispered. I nodded once. "I don't need to win. I just need them to lose." The court date came 2 weeks later. It was small, just a dusty room with creaky benches and an old judge, who looked like he'd seen enough HOA drama to fill a lifetime. Tyler showed up in a blazer. Madison wore pearls and pretended to cry when I played the video of him cutting my fence. But the moment I showed the footage of her slipping a letter under Amy's landlord's door, clear as day, the courtroom went dead silent. The judge looked straight at her. "Mrs. Carlson, you do understand this letter had nothing to do with your neighborhood, correct?" She sniffled. "I was just looking out for the community." "He's dangerous. He put up electric fences on his land," I said calmly, "after you vandalized it." The judge turned to me next. "You've got everything documented, Mr. Walker?" "All of it," I said, tapping the flash drive in my pocket. He nodded. His ruling was swift. Restraining orders granted. Trespassing citations issued. And the best part? A legal injunction. The HOA was banned from making any claims over my property. Permanently. I thought it would end there. But fate had one more gift to give. Turns out, that news segment, it kept spreading. A few weeks later, I got a call from a local land rights attorney, one who'd seen too many folks get steamrolled by neighborhood associations who thought they were gods. He offered to represent me pro bono in a civil suit for emotional distress, loss of property value, and harassment. I said yes. The court ordered the HOA to pay damages. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to replace my busted gate, repaint the barn, and install solar panels on the main house. Madison and Tyler? They resigned from the board a month later. Word was Tyler's business, consulting firm, tanked after the video made it to Reddit's front page. Madison deleted all her social media and moved in with her sister in Nevada. Couldn't have happened to nicer people. Now, things are quiet. The electric fence still hums softly at night, but it's mostly symbolic now. The real power is the sign that hangs above my gate, new, hand-carved, and sealed in weatherproof varnish. Walker Ranch, EST 1965. Not for sale. Not for share. Tank still lounges on the porch, blind in one eye but alert as ever. I still wake early. Still mend fences. Still work the land my grandfather gave his life to. But I do it with a new kind of peace, because the HOA declared my ranch community land, and I fought back with electric fences and pure spite, and I won.